Hello everyone, welcome to Narayana IS Academy. My name is Shubham Sagar and today we'll be discussing 5 articles taken from Hindu and Indian Express of 14th May 2024. If we talk about the first article, that is talking about food inflation, which reached an all-time high in April. This particular article is an excuse for us to talk about inflation, deflation, reflation, stagflation, skewflation and other such terms which can be asked in or which can rather be asked in UPSC Prelims as well as Mains. If we talk about the second article, that is about India-Nepal relationship, this particular relationship has its own up and downs, and we'll be talking about all the ups or most of the ups as well as most of the downs. Now, if you talk about the third article, that is about Chabahar port. What is happening between India and Iran? We have signed a 10-year pact. What implications it will have for India-Central Asia relationship? All these things we'll be talking in this particular third article. If you talk about the fourth article, that is about XENOTRANSPLANTATION, which is a phenomena where we are transplanting living tissues of one species into another. And why this particular xenotransplantation is in news? Because the first person to receive pig kidney has died or has passed away. If we talk about the last article, that is about employment stories. There are different articles, different data regarding employment figures. Here we'll talk about jobless growth. Here we will talk about different types of unemployment, disguised unemployment, structural unemployment, seasonal unemployment, cyclical unemployment, and all the other areas which can be asked in UPSC Pre as well as Mains. If we talk about the first article of the day, that is talking about food inflation scaled 4-month high in April. So the fact here is we are learning from UPSC perspective. We are reading this particular article from UPSC perspective. So data per se, that 4.14% increase has happened or 8% food inflation has happened. These data are not important. What is important is what is inflation? What is deflation? What is disinflation? What is stagflation? What is hyperinflation? What is skewflation? These points, these terms we have to keep in mind. So if you're talking about this particular article from UPSC Mains perspective, GS3 issues related to Indian economy. And here, pay attention to the keywords, not on the specific numbers. Like this particular article is about increase in food inflation. In April month, the food or the retail inflation related to food, that was hovering around 8%, which is actually a big number. But again, you don't have to focus on the number per se. What is retail inflation? What is wholesale inflation? Retail inflation, which is also known as CPI Consumer Price Index, that means whatever we people are buying, we retailers, we consumers are buying. Wholesale means when somebody is buying in bulk. So what is the wholesale price they are paying? Generally, the wholesale price is lesser as compared to the retail price. So high food inflation in UPSC 2011, this particular question was asked. The answer was 2 and 3 only, but that is not the thing why this particular question is here. This is just to give you an idea which kind of questions can come. And there has been a lot of questions which has been coming on inflation, meaning of inflation, deflation, disinflation, Phillips curve. We'll talk about that. So retail inflation, why this particular news we have taken? It has remained almost steady at 4.83%, but the food inflation has increased to 8.7%. And generally, there was a data. There was one particular article where people were saying that even the vegetable or the veg food which people are consuming these days, that has become more expensive than the non-veg food. And maybe this particular food inflation has a role to play in this, right? So now urban versus rural inflation, again, you don't have to pay specific attention to the data. Now we'll come to the main part. The main part which is actually very important from both UPSC Pre as well as Mains perspective. First of all, there are certain curves which as you go on in economy, you will read about it. Like Phillips curve, Lorentz curve, Lafargue curve, Kuznets curve. Here we are focusing on Phillips curve. So, and you have to understand this. If you're able to understand Phillips curve, this particular article you understood, right? So Phillips curve establishes a relationship between inflation and unemployment. What it said is there is an inverse relationship between inflation and unemployment. Inverse relationship. That means if inflation rises, unemployment reduces. In simple terms, there is a word mehengai. If it increases, the unemployment, the berozgari decreases. Now this is actually very interesting. And that's why we generally say, people keep on saying that there is so much inflation, we have to reduce inflation. But if you reduce inflation, your unemployment may increase. Now the point here is how this happens. We have to take a basic example. Let's say the price of Coca-Cola increases. Then the producer of Coca-Cola, they have higher incentive to produce Coke or Coca-Cola. So they will not produce it themselves. They will hire people who will be producing coke for them, right? And that's how unemployment decreases when inflation increases. So this is Phillips curve. And you have to keep it in mind when we're reading about different terms. Like inflation, general increase in price of goods and services. Deflation is opposite of inflation, decrease in prices of goods and services. Simple. Now, after these two terms, you will not read stagflation. You will go and you will read about disinflation. So inflation, deflation, and then disinflation. Inflation, prices of goods and services are increasing. Deflation, prices of goods and services are decreasing. Disinflation, prices of goods and services are increasing, but at a lower rate. Let's take an example. Let's say in 2023, the price of any particular product is rupees 120. And in 2024, it is 132. So there is 10% increase here in the price, right? And let's say if we take it next year, and this is around 2025, 140 rupees. So if you compare it with 132 and you take 132 as the base price, so this is less than 10% increase in price compared to 2024. And this is an example of disinflation. Although the prices are increasing, but the rate of inflation is less. Please understand this. UPSC has asked multiple questions on this particular thing in the previous years, right? So now let's come back. We have done inflation, we have done deflation, stagflation. We have just read about Phillips curve, that when inflation increases, unemployment decreases. But general law of economy, which was Phillips curve, that is generally getting violated in stagflation. Your inflation is also increasing, your unemployment is increasing, your GDP is stagnant. All these things are happening. General laws of economy are getting violated in stagflation, and that's why you have to keep this stagflation in mind. Sometimes not all rules will be applied, right? Reflation, we have, again, go back to the Phillips curve. What we have read, if inflation increases, unemployment decreases. So generally, sometimes what happens, not generally, in certain scenarios, what happens, government tries to increase prices of goods and services so that unemployment decreases. Again, go back to Phillips curve. So when government-induced inflation happens in economy, that is known as reflation. Skewflation, skewed, some prices of goods and services are increasing and some of the goods and services prices are decreasing. That is skewflation. And we have talked about disinflation now. So keep these points in mind. Hyperinflation, too much inflation. Prices of goods and services are increasing at a very rapid rate. Then there is something called as shrinkflation. What is shrinkflation? Take an example of Parle G. So what is happening with Parle G? The price is still same, rupees 5, but the quantity is decreasing of Parle G. Earlier, let's say it was 100 gram. Now it has reduced to 60 gram. This is known as shrinkflation. Although the prices are same, but the quantity has reduced. Keep these points in mind. Keep these particular terms in mind. These are very, very important. Moving on to the second article of the day, India-Nepal relationship. Now, Prateek sir has covered this particular article, not exactly this article. So if I'm not wrong, on 9th May, Prateek sir talked about Kala Pani issue. And that was just one of the issues related to India-Nepal relationship. Today, we'll be covering India-Nepal relationship in extensive detail because we do know that in GS paper 2, India and its neighborhood, Nepal, acquires a very, very important significance for us. So now, and right now in this particular article, we'll be taking the third domain of this particular article, that is China. What is happening in China? How China's policy has changed. Earlier, it was hide your strength and bid your time. That was Deng Xiaoping's policy. Now it has changed to aggressive aggrandizement. China is fighting here, there and everywhere. What is that implication of that particular Chinese stance on India-Nepal relationship? So it's a much broader article compared to what Prateek sir has covered on 9th May. That is also an important article. So whenever you're reading India-Nepal relationship, take that particular article of 9th May and this article and read it in entirety. Fine. So now let's move on. So previous year question, they have asked us, the long-sustained image of India as a leader of oppressed and marginalized nations has disappeared on account of its newfound role in the emerging global order. Now we have to understand this big brother attitude. So many countries, which are our neighbors, they have certain issues. Let's say Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Maldives, and they are raising certain issues. I'm not saying that is a correct stance on their behalf, but generally this big brother, small brother attitude happens. Sometimes when a country is very big, the smaller countries which are neighboring this big country, they have a phobia that maybe we will acquire them. So this big brother attitude, you have to understand this and you have to see this particular article in that regard, right? So now let's talk about the context. The context is we are having our own election. So there's a probability that maybe there is a new government in India in June. Nepal is going through its own turmoil, right? Hindu kingdom, earlier it was, now it is a secular democratic republic. So many things are happening in Nepal. Plus again, boundary dispute, which Prateek sir has covered on 9th May. So there are so many things which are happening between India and Nepal. And in that context, China also comes into picture. So China is continuously influencing our neighbors. We have talked about, or you must have heard about rather, Hambantota port in Sri Lanka. So Nepal is also no exception. Bangladesh, Myanmar, Sitwe port, so many areas where China is trying to exert its influence. And here also, and understand this, from UPSC perspective, terms are very important. Hide your strength and bid your time. So there was a time when Chinese premier was Deng Xiaoping. This person whom you're seeing right now in front of your screen is Deng Xiaoping. He was earlier Chinese premier. His policy was hide your strength and bid your time. That means don't take riskless steps. Don't take too many aggressive steps. Wait for your time. Now the current Chinese premier, that is Xi Jinping, his policy is revolving around aggressive aggrandizement. South China Sea, here, there, everywhere, we have talked about this, that China is fighting on different fronts. They are even fighting with us, if you know what I mean, right? So China is trying to lure Nepal. And in that regard, Nepal becomes a very, very important ally for us, right? So geopolitical dynamics, if we talk about new government in June, there is a probability, right? So attention towards Nepal increases, especially due to China's growing influence. Recent political changes in Nepal favoring China's interest raise concerns for India. What is happening in Maldives? What is happening in Sri Lanka? Hambantota port, keep it in mind. If we talk about from UPSC pre-perspective, then Hambantota port, where is it? Sitwe port, where is it, right? If we talk from means perspective, then what is the historical significance of Nepal for India? What is the political significance of Nepal for India? What is the economic significance of Nepal for India? Like, India is Nepal's largest trading partner. So you have to divide it. See, what we say now in UPSC, there is something called as pestle analysis. What is pestle? Political dimension, economic dimension, social dimension, technological dimension, anthropological dimension, and legal dimension. Whenever there is a mains answer and we are talking about this particular article from both pre and mains perspective, you have to break your answer. If India-Nepal relationship questions comes in mains, you have to break it. What is the political significance? What is the economic significance? Social, technological, anthropological, and legal significance, right? So historical significance. We always had lots of affiliation with Nepal, right? And there is something called as soft power. Buddhism, Hinduism, that has always connected India and Nepal. So remember the historical significance, right? So if we talk about the historical and cultural ties, so there are centers of Buddhist and Hindu culture, right? And so many things. We talk about Buddha, we talk about Sita Mata, and all these people, and all these gods and goddesses who are treated as gods and goddesses in different religions. So these are the ties which bind India and Nepal. The cultural affinity between the two nations is evident in their shared festivals, traditions, and languages. There are certain people, and even in our Indian army, there are so many people from Nepal. There are so many contingent of our army that comes from the Nepal population. So we always had very, very strong relationship with Nepal, and we need to keep that relationship intact, right? So economic cooperation, remember this particular point. All the jibber jabber are good, but the point is, now if we talk about the economic cooperation part between India and Nepal, you have to keep in mind this particular point. India is Nepal's largest trading partner. Keywords are important. Like we have talked about Deng Xiaoping's hide your strength and bid your time, Xi Jinping, aggressive aggrandizement. Similarly, these small points, they are very important. They will make your answer much better, right? So in Nepal, there are sectors like hydropower, infrastructure, tourism. In all these areas, we are cooperating, and these economic ties have helped in creating jobs and boosting economic growth in both countries. So all these economic cooperation has started from the 1950 pact, which we signed with Nepal. Then now Nepal is relying a lot on us, and we have to keep that fact in mind. And also China is trying to influence Nepal in one way or the other. We have to keep that in mind as well. Political relations, if we talk about. So big brother attitude, we have talked about when we were talking in the initial phases of this particular article. We have talked about that any small nation has this fear that the nearby big nation can or may acquire it or make it a part of the bigger entity, right? So we always have to be very sensitive to the grievances of the country, Nepal country as a whole. And that is what we are talking about here. Recent years, there has been a renewed effort to strengthen political ties. High-level visits have been frequent, but the keyword here, just like in economic relation, you will remember that India is Nepal's largest trading partner. In political relations, just remember this big brother attitude, that we have to be very sensitive in how we are treating Nepal, because sensitivity is required whenever we are dealing with a smaller neighboring nations, right? Challenges and opportunities. Despite the efforts to strengthen the relationship, India and Nepal face several challenges, one of which was the Kalapani border dispute. Issues such as border dispute, trade imbalances, and differences in political ideologies have strengthened their ties in the past, right? We also have an open border, which you must be knowing about. However, both countries have also recognized the opportunities that come with closer cooperation. By working together, India and Nepal can address common challenges such as poverty, climate change, and regional security. And we need Nepal in every which domain. And we are trying to improve our relationship with Nepal with each passing day, and we'll keep on doing that, right? Now, if we talk about the future prospects, the future of India-Nepal relationship looks promising. One more thing I want to add here, since we have talked about the third dimension of this particular relationship also, that is China, do remember, whenever we are talking about India-China relationship, never say Indo-China, say Sino-India relationship. Because Indo-China is a region in Asia, especially in South Asia. So the countries like Vietnam you talk about, that comes under Indo-China because they have been influenced by both Indian as well as Chinese culture. So whenever we are talking about rather India and China relationship, always say Sino-India relationship. Keep that in mind because China has been involved in this particular article in more ways than one. So India-Nepal Joint Commission has been set up to enhance cooperation in various fields, and as both countries continue to work together, the India-Nepal relationship is likely to become stronger with each passing day. So that was this particular article. Keep the important points in mind, the important areas which we have to focus on, or you people have to focus on as UPSC aspirant. Now, if we talk about the conclusion part, so that this relationship between India and Nepal is one of the strongest neighboring relationship which we have, right? The two countries have shown a willingness to overcome them, whatever differences, because generally we will have differences, right? And you can have, like there is a saying, you can change your friends, but you cannot change your neighbor. We cannot change our neighbor. Nepal is our neighbor. China is our neighbor, and we have to sort whatever differences we have. As India and Nepal continue to build on their shared history and culture, the future looks bright for their relationship, and we have to keep on working on this particular relationship. If we talk about the third article of the day, India stakes in Chabahar. UPSC has already asked a PYQ on Chabahar. Now, if you look at the map, you always have to look at the map if you're talking from IR perspective, that is international relations perspective, right? So Chabahar, if you see India's map, so we are an immediate neighbor of Pakistan, but Pakistan is of no use to us, right? They are not giving us an access to Afghanistan, to Central Asia, and in that regard, Chabahar is very important for us because if you're going to Chabahar and if you see this particular line here, we can get an access to Central Asia, we can get an access to Russia and to Europe as well. So Chabahar is a critical point here. It's also very critical because if you see this map again, so near Chabahar, you have a port in Pakistan which is known as Gwadar, where China is exerting its influence. In the previous article, we have talked about China's influence in Nepal. China is again trying to encircle us, and that is string of pearls and all those policies which are associated with China. So we have to be very aware. And Chabahar is of very critical because China is trying to encircle us. Chabahar's importance increases manyfold. And in this regard, we have signed a 10-year pact with Iran, where we are trying to do certain things. We are trying to start some operation in Chabahar port. So if you talk about UPSC CSE 2017 PYQ, they have already asked a PYQ on Chabahar port. What is the importance? The importance is India will not depend on Pakistan for access to Afghanistan and Central Asia. Remember, there is a term here which is known as enemy countries. Pakistan is a enemy country of us. China, they come in enemy countries category. So we cannot rely on these countries, Pakistan as well as China, right? So now what is the context? India and Iran signed a 10-year contract for the operation of a terminal at the strategically important Chabahar port in Iran. So from exam perspective, if you talk from UPSC pre perspective, you have to remember where is Chabahar? In Iran. Where is Gwadar? In Pakistan. What is happening here? We will be getting access to Central Asia. There's one particular corridor which is going on, or the construction of which is going on in Central Asia. That is known as INSTC. And this Chabahar port will connect us to INSTC, International North-South Transport Corridor. So these are the keywords which you have to focus. On this particular article, we are trying to focus maximum from pre-point of view, right? So again, who has signed the contract? IPGL, India Ports Global Limited versus PMO in Tehran. Even if you forget these parts, that's fine. But the point here is, where is Chabahar? Where is Gwadar? What is INSTC? These points you have to remember. Even the amount which they have invested, because we are talking from UPSC perspective. Now, what are the areas which are important? Chabahar port. again, if we include the means aspect also, they can ask you what are the strategic significance, what are the areas which are acting as limitations. Remember, US and Iran, they are sworn enemies. And India has always followed a non-alignment policy, NAM policy, right? So we are trying to balance our relationship with US as well. We're trying to balance our relationship with Iran as well. And this is not an easy task, right? So Chabahar port, deep water port. Now here again, if we talk from UPSC perspective, what are the things which are very important in this particular slide? See the word here, Gulf of Oman. You must be seeing the map. Now, whenever you're reading these things, you should be thinking, what is Gulf? What is Bay? Right? So these are the terms which you have to understand from exam perspective. What is Gulf? What is Bay? They are similar. So what is Gulf and what is Bay? They are water bodies which are mainly surrounded by land from three sides. But Gulf is generally bigger than Bay. So please understand this. Gulf and Bay, water body mainly surrounded by land from three sides, like Persian Gulf, like Bay of Bengal. But generally Gulf is bigger than Bay. Bay of Bengal is an exception, which is actually very big. Similarly, you must be hearing about certain words like strait and isthmus. That's how you read a slide. So try to think about what is a strait, what is an isthmus, right? So like you have different kind of straits you have. Strait of Gibraltar you have, Panama Isthmus you have. So strait is a narrow water body which connects two larger water bodies. Like there is a Strait of Gibraltar which you have to locate on world map. It connects Mediterranean Sea with Atlantic Ocean, if I'm not wrong, right? Similarly, there is isthmus, Panama Isthmus. It is a narrow landmass. What is an isthmus? Narrow landmass connecting two larger landmasses. Like Panama Isthmus connects North America with South America. So you have to pay attention to these points. These are important from exam perspective. So India has signed an agreement, first signed an agreement in January 2003, and the progress has been little slow because of US pressure on us. And this you have to understand. So significance. Now here, this particular slide is important from both pre as well as means perspective. What is the strategic significance, economic significance, geopolitical significance? Strategic significance, we can go to Afghanistan. And in Afghanistan, there are so many things which we can, like Afghanistan is strategically very important to us, right? Afghanistan can also give us an access to Pakistan to see what is happening in Pakistan. Very important ally of us, Afghanistan. Again, it will also allow us to see what China is trying to do in Pakistan. So these are the strategic points which necessitates our growing reliance on Chabahar port. Now, if you talk about the economic importance, it facilitates trade with Afghanistan and Central Asia. And geopolitical significance, this Chabahar will make us a part of INSTC, which we were talking about, International North-South Transport Corridor. And thereby, we'll be getting connected with Russia as well as Eurasia. Now, from Eurasia, you must be thinking about a term called transcontinental countries. What are transcontinental countries? Country which lies in two continents, two or more continents, they are known as transcontinental country. Like Russia is a transcontinental country because it is a part of both Asia as well as Europe. Similarly, if we talk about Turkey per se, that is also a transcontinental country. So keep a tab of transcontinental country. Then there are certain terms which you have to prepare from your exam perspective. Landlocked country and then doubly landlocked country. Find out, this is your homework, find out how many countries in the world are doubly landlocked. Landlocked means surrounded by land from all sides. Doubly landlocked means these are the countries which are surrounded by those countries which are landlocked in nature. So doubly landlocked, there are very few countries in the world which are doubly landlocked. Right. About the INSTC project. So this is a project, you can see the red line here. This is INST. So if you talk about the INSTC project, see the red line here. And if you're seeing this red line from Mumbai to Moscow rather, if we have to go, if we follow this route, the route is much shorter. But the current route which we are taking, see this route is so much bigger, and that's what they are saying. If we become a part of INSTC via Chabahar port, this will reduce our time. Just like think about the example of Suez Canal. When Suez Canal was constructed, what happened? Earlier people used to go through Africa and then they used to traverse to Europe. But when Suez Canal was constructed, the time was reduced to a greater extent. Similar kind of thing will be happening, although not on such huge proportion. So that is what they are saying. INSTC will connect Indian Ocean and Persian Gulf to the Caspian Sea via Iran and then onwards to Northern Europe via St. Petersburg in Russia. Now, point here is, again, whenever you are looking at slides, try to see what are the areas which UPSC can focus on. Like you have seen a word here called Caspian Sea. Now, your homework is again, try to find out those countries which are bordering Caspian Sea. Try to find out those countries which are bordering Mediterranean Sea, Aral Sea. These are important points from exam perspective. Fine. So again, it will reduce the time and cost of transporting goods. That's what we are talking about here. 13 member countries, and India is also a member of INSTC. Do remember that. Bulgaria rather is acting as an observer member. Now, if we talk from means perspective as well, so if we talk about the challenges facing the Chabahar port project, so we have just talked about how India is trying to maintain a delicate balance between India, US and India-Iran relationship. That's what we are reading in the political and diplomatic challenges. Economic challenges, we need funding, we need investment. It cannot come from our side. We need the help of international organizations as well. Logistical challenges, integration with the larger INSTC project. And there are some delays which are happening. Geopolitical challenges, complication. Russia, Ukraine is fighting and we want to get access to Russia via this Chabahar and then INSTC. But again, there's so many turmoils which are happening in that particular region. So all these are different challenges which can be asked in pre, but the higher chances it can be asked in mains. So keep these points in mind. Now, if you talk about this particular article, this is related to science and tech, xenotransplantation. And what is xenotransplantation? What UPSC can ask? Why this particular article is in news? Xenotransplantation, this particular term is in news. So what is xenotransplantation? Let's say there is a pig, their heart is taken out and it is inserted into any human. In simple terms, this is xenotransplantation. And why this is in news? Because the person, this Richard Slayman, he was the first person to receive a pig kidney and he has died 2 months after the surgery. But the family is not saying this has happened because of that particular pig kidney. So they are not saying that. So now this term becomes important from UPSC perspective. GS3, science and tech. So xenotransplantation, just remember the word xeno means foreign. Fine. Now, if you talk about the previous question, similar kind of questions, stem cell therapy, and again, there are gene editing technologies like CRISPR-Cas9. So just remember these words. They can ask you that CRISPR-Cas9 is associated with what? And they can give you options, gene editing, this, that, or BCD, something like that. So they can. You have to also understand the areas where these particular things are being utilized or used on, right? So stem cell therapy is getting popularity in India. Similar kind of question has been asked in UPSC CSE 2017, just to give you an idea what you have to focus on. And then we'll also see the prelims practice question. So the context, what is the context here? Richard Slayman, the first ever recipient of a modified pig kidney transplant, he died, he passed away, and we just saw his image, how he looked like. The point is, now when you see a person, when you see his image, you remember things more. So again, and that's how you also will remember xenotransplantation. What is xenotransplantation? Now, what is xenotransplantation? And why we are taking pig only? In general, when you will see or when you will read xenotransplantation in more detail, you will realize that we are taking animals and pig is the most prominent one whose organs we are taking and we are transferring it into human. Why? Because pigs, so many organs, they are very identical or they resemble to that of humans. But what are the ethical complications involved here? Moral complications, different other kind of complications, right? So xenotransplantation, transplantation, implantation or infusion into a human recipient of either live cells, tissues or organs from a non-human animal source, which is generally pig, right? Now here there are different terms. Ex vivo contact, which is process or experiment performed outside an organism, generally in a lab setting. That is ex vivo contact, right? And these biological components, they are generally removed from the original organism, which in this particular case was a pig, and have interacted with the cells, tissues. Again, you don't have to do PhD here. We are talking from pre-perspective. So what is xenotransplantation? What is the basic meaning? Use of, in simple terms, use of animal cells and organs to heal humans. And this was first tried in humans in 1980s. And we have just seen the first case of pig kidney transplantation. Fine. And why such things are happening? Because of demand-supply issue. In economy, we read about demand-supply. The demand is more, the supply is less. The demand of human organs is more, but the supply is less. And there are so many cartels also which are going on. Illegal organ donation things are going on. To put a curb on that, we need such phenomena like xenotransplantation. How is xenotransplantation done? Again, there is genetic modification, selection of donor animals. You cannot select any or every donor animal. There has to be a certain procedure which has to be adhered to, and that's what we are talking about now. If we talk from UPSC perspective, UPSC pre-perspective, they can ask you CRISPR-Cas9. It is associated with farming technique, gene editing technique. So remember, CRISPR-Cas9 is a gene editing technique. Sometimes, and you read this, when you read science and technology in more detail, you talk or you read about something called three-parent baby. There are certain babies whose mitochondria is deformed or something. So so many things happen. And there, in those areas, gene editing technologies like CRISPR-Cas9 plays a crucial role. Transplant surgery, immunosuppression. Again, you don't have to do too much PhD here. Just understand what is xenotransplantation. And now the most important part is, why are pigs often used for xenotransplantation? And the basic scenario is, or the basic gist of this particular question is, anatomical and physiological similarity. Their organs, such as heart and kidneys, are very similar in size and function to human organs. That's it. Ease of genetic editing. So there are so many things, like the genes or the genetic makeup of pigs, they are also very similar to that of humans. The organs, they are very similar, and that's why we are picking pigs. But it is not without its issue. Now, this particular person, he has passed away. There will be a proper auditing, etc., which will be going on to see whether xenotransplantation was responsible for it or not. So breeding and availability. Pigs are readily available, and we are trying to answer the question why pigs are often used for xenotransplantation. Ethical and regulatory acceptance. People have accepted this more or less from like last 10-15 years. People have accepted this pig-derived products such as insulin and heart valves for human uses. Immune system compatibility. Our immune system and their immune system are very compatible to each other, and that's why we are using pigs. Now, what are the challenges here? Again, this particular portion is important from both pre as well as mains, but more so from mains perspective. So challenges of xenotransplantation: immune rejection, infectious diseases. The animals from whom we are taking the organs, they may be suffering from some disease. Maybe their immune system varies slightly with that of ours, right? There can be some genetic and physiological differences, and that's why they are pigs and we are humans. That's why they are other species, right? Ethical and regulatory issues. What are the ethical concerns? Questions on when animal welfare and human identity. We have a right to live. Aren't these like animals? They also have a right to live. So should we take those organs or not? So there are certain issues, ethical concerns. And that reminds us of PETA. Do read about what is PETA. Long-term effects, chronic health issues, surveillance requirement, just like we have seen this particular guy, he died 2 months after. So is there some long-term requirements, or is there some side effects, so to say, and we have to be aware of those things as well. Now, if you talk about this particular article, this is talking about the employment stories. So there are so many variations regarding the unemployment data. Some, like there is an organization which is known as CMI, Center for Monitoring Indian Economy. Then there is an organization called ILO, International Labour Organization. Then there is something known as PLFS, Periodic Labour Force Survey. Everyone is having their own data. Every such entity is having their own data, and they're not converging because they have different indicators. So what are the things which are important from exam perspective? We'll talk about the important areas. Plus, you also have to remember different types of, or you have to understand rather, different types of unemployment. What is frictional unemployment? What is structural unemployment? What is disguised unemployment? What is cyclical unemployment? All these words are very important because questions have been framed on it. So GS paper 3, Indian economy and issues related to planning and mobilization. And going more into the intricacies of the detail is not important. What is actually important here is the points which I just told you. So this particular question has been asked by UPSC in 2019, which was a little bit technical in nature. And why we have included this particular question rather, just to give you an idea that UPSC does ask questions on employment per se, right? So employment data have been surrounded by disputes due to complex economic changes. And why this is happening? If you go to NCERT and if you go to class 11th economic NCERT, and if I'm not wrong, chapter 6 is there, which talks about employment per se. There you will understand. And you must be having certain idea that we have informal labor, we have formal labor, and informal labor is around 90%. And in that informal labor also, there are self-employed people. There are people who are working in their own family setup. So there are so many variations which lead to variation in data. So simple narratives are inadequate. Again, you don't have to go that deep into detail. Just understand that there are different surveys who are having their own indicators rather, like PLFS survey, which is conducted by NSSO. Now you have to understand what is NSSO, National Sample Survey Organization. So they are conducting their own surveys. Again, what are their indicators? They have different employment status, like usual status, current status. So many things are happening here. And they conduct PLFS survey. They can ask you, who conducts PLFS survey? If we talk from exam perspective. So NSO, National Statistical Office, they conduct this PLFS survey. Now they can also ask you one more question, or which can be associated with like PLFS survey rather is associated with which ministry? MOSPI ministry, Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. So And now here again, what is important from exam perspective in this particular slide? The starting year. When was this PLFS survey started? Like in 2017. So keep in mind the starting year. What are the objectives of PLFS? Again, don't go into that nitty-gritty. Just understand in a particular slide what are the areas which you have to focus more on. Annual comprehensive assessment. What we are trying to see here from these slides, that there are different methods. There are different ways of calculating employment and unemployment data, because of which we are having variations. International Labour Organization, ILO, they have their own global standards. And again, Indian data is varying from the ILO data. Data compilation and all these things are given. Center for Monitoring Indian Economy. And there was a report which they published 1 or 2 years back, which said that we are, like, already there has been talks, 1991 onwards, we are entering into a phenomena which is known as jobless growth. Again, if you want, you can go back to class 11th Economic NCERT chapter 6. There you will see the data, GDP growth and employment growth. And you will see GDP growth is happening at a much faster rate as compared to employment growth, which is happening at a very slow rate. And that led to a phenomena called jobless growth. And that has been highlighted more and more by this CMIE, Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, right? Now, this is the most important part of this particular article, types of unemployment. So you're saying this guy is seasonal, structural, cyclical, technological, frictional, vulnerable unemployment. These are important areas where you have to focus on. More so, the unemployment types which I'll be ticking. Like this guy's unemployment, very important. Seasonal, very important. Structural, very important. Structural and technological are very similar. Cyclical unemployment, very important. Frictional unemployment, very important. Now, let's try to understand it in simple terms. What is disguised unemployment? UPSC has already asked a PYQ on disguised unemployment. And they say that marginal productivity of labor is 0 in this scenario. Let's try to understand it in simple terms. So and you see this a lot in farming sector, this disguised unemployment. Simple terms, let's say there are 3 people who are needed to do a job, but 4 people are there, they are doing the job. And they are doing chitter-chatter, gossiping and everything. So in this scenario, the marginal productivity of the 4th labor is 0. Understand this. You only need 3 people, but 4 people are working. So the 4th person productivity is 0, and this is disguised unemployment. In Hindi, we say chipa hua unemployment. Hope you are understanding this. Seasonal unemployment. So in Bihar areas or UP areas, you must be seeing people are involved in Kharif season. Rice is getting cultivated. So people work in the farms. But in the winter season, the Rabi season, wheat cultivation is not that pronounced. So they move to Punjab and other areas for other works, because the employment in farming sector is seasonal in nature. That is seasonal unemployment. Structural unemployment. We are currently going through 4th industrial revolution, which we have covered in various articles. So there are so many technological changes which are happening, because of which people are losing job. This is structural unemployment, and this is very similar to technological unemployment. Then you have cyclical unemployment. There are expansion and contraction phases in business. Sometimes businesses are booming, they are taking more people. Sometimes businesses are contracting, they are laying off people. So this is cyclical unemployment. Then frictional unemployment. So let's say I am working somewhere and I am a PhD holder. So I won't take any job or every job. So there will be a gap between which, like, let's say I have left a job and I have taken another job. So let's say there is a gap of 2 months. That is frictional unemployment. So do pay attention to these areas. These types of unemployment, they are actually very, very important. So do pay attention to these types of unemployment, which we just discussed. These are very important. UPSC has already asked a lot of PYQs on it, and you have to be ready for it, be it prelims or mains. Now let's solve some questions, because the more questions we solve, the more we'll be able to retain a particular matter. First question for you. Again, this is a little bit technical question. And if you get this question wrong, don't worry about it at all. So this is about employment and unemployment data collection in India, PLFS. And when you're reading this particular question, and if you get this wrong, just make a note of it. Just wherever you're making your economy notes, make a note of this particular question and note down the facts. So PLFS aims to assess employment annually using usual status and current weekly status methodology. If you go back to the slides and see the last article which we did, this is actually correct. So if one is correct, you're left with ABD. Always do option elimination. In 2017, ILO revised this method to include more data points. That is also correct. The answer here is D1, 2 and 3. This is a very, very technical question. If you are getting it wrong, no issues at all. Don't worry about it. There will be some questions where I'll be telling you, if you're getting this wrong, that means you have not paid attention to what we have discussed in the lecture or in the class. So now moving on to the second question. This is also a little bit technical in nature. If you're getting it wrong, don't worry about it. Principal unemployment grew consistently since 1983, showing no periods of jobless growth. Pradhan Mantri Mudra Yojana. And what is the full form of Mudra? Micro Units Development and Refinance Agency. Significantly influenced self-employment growth from 2015 to 2022. Now see here. Mudra scheme, if you have heard about it, that we are providing loans to certain semi-entrepreneurs. So that means even if you just use common sense, you will realize that second has to be correct. If second has to be correct, you are left with B and D, right? So that eliminates two options. Now, first statement, grew consistently. Again, consistently is not a like an extreme word that it has grown at a very rapid rate or something. First statement is also correct. The answer is D, 1, 2, and 3. Again, it's a bit of a technical question. If you're getting it wrong, don't worry about it. Now, you have to extract some information from this particular question. Like, you have to go home. If you're already in home, pause this video. Once you're done with this particular lecture, then what you have to do is you have to go and read about Mudra scheme. What are different kind of loans which are given to different sectors, which is 1 lakh loan and all the different categorization under Mudra. We have just discussed the full form, Micro Units Development and Refinance Agency. Now this question ideally, again, is a tough question, but we should be knowing about this question. The previous two questions, if you're getting it wrong, those are very technical in nature. It's fine if you're getting it wrong. But this one, Chabahar port, that is in Iran. Sitwe port, we have discussed this. Even when we were discussing India-Nepal relationship, we have discussed about Sitwe. Odisha port, we have not discussed this. But Russia, Ukraine, they are continuously fighting. So Odisha port is in news. Gwadar, Pakistan. All four are correct. So currently we are going through a scenario where D is the answer, but that will not be the case in all the practice questions. Now let's talk about xenotransplantation. This will be an easy question. Now if you're getting this particular question wrong, then that is an issue. You should not be getting this question wrong. So what is xenotransplantation? The transplantation, implantation, or infusion into humans of live cell tissues or organs from non-human animal sources. This is the answer B. You should not be getting this question wrong. If you're getting this question wrong, then maybe you have not paid attention to what we have discussed earlier. So the answer is B. This particular question also, you should not be getting this wrong. This is a basic question, but there is a very high probability that you may get it wrong, but you shouldn't. So inflation, deflation, disinflation, skewflation. We have talked about skewflation. Increase in prices of some goods, decrease in prices of others. So fourth is correct. Inflation, increase in prices of goods and services. First is correct. So that means only two, it has to be only two. A is eliminated. You are left with B, C and D. So currently what students say that, sir, in this particular scenario, in these kind of questions where we have only 1, only 2, only 3, only 4 or all 4, it becomes very difficult to do option elimination. But here also you can do option elimination like we have just done. We have eliminated one option because we are sure about 1 and 4. Now second and third, the definition has been changed. Disinflation is decrease in the rate of inflation, and we have discussed this in detail. Deflation is decrease in the prices of goods and services. So second and third are wrong. So the answer is B, only 2. Please, if you have got this question wrong, you have to go back and read about the different inflation scenarios. We have talked about different types of terms we have talked about, if I'm not wrong, in the first article. Now let's talk about the mains practice question. With changing Chinese policy, examine the different dimensions of India-Nepal relationship. Let's say it's a 10 marks, 150 words question. So here you will have an intro, you have a body, you have a conclusion. How Chinese policy is changing. So here you can talk about, and we have stressed on this, Deng Xiaoping's hide your strength and bid your time to Xi Jinping aggressive aggrandizement. China today is more aggressive than ever. So this can be your intro part, and then you can talk about the historical, the political, the different dimensions. There we have used the word pestle analysis. Political dimension, economic, social, technological, anthropological, legal. Generally, you use this pestle dimension in essay. But this is not a hard and fast rule that you can use it only in essay. You can use it anywhere and everywhere, right? Anywhere and everywhere. So keep that in mind. So historical and cultural relationship, we have talked about that Buddhism, Hinduism, they are the soft powers which bind India and Nepal. You can talk about that, or you can rather talk about that. Political relationship, you can talk about how, like Nepal, we have a free border or open border rather. India and Nepal, open border. We have some political tension with border disputes and all these things. But still, in our army, there are a certain contingent which belong from Nepal. All these things you can talk about. Then the big brother attitude, the key word which we have discussed earlier. Economic relationship, Nepal is, or India is, Nepal's largest trading partner. This is a key term which you can use. And then you can talk about all the other areas where Nepal and India are having cooperation. Hydropower, infrastructure and tourism per se. and then the challenges and opportunity. So that's how, like the different dimensions, if you can include the more dimensions you will include, the better your answer will become. And then the conclusion part, that there is always scope for improvement. Just like there is scope for improvement in your studies, there is a scope for improvement in India-Nepal relationship as well. And then you will conclude it via the conclusion. So just like there is always scope in your studies, improvement scope, right? Similarly, there is scope for improvement in India-Nepal relationship as well. So that's how you will conclude it, that there are various areas of scopes for improvement, and we need to be wary of China and their involvement in India-Nepal relationship. Thank you for watching this video. If you like this video, do like, share and comment, and don't forget to subscribe Narayana IAS Academy channel.